So tonight we're going to look at Everybody Loves Esther. As I thought about what was going on in chapter 2, and that should be verse 18 right there, not 17. So it just seemed to me that as we look into this, it's the closer we look at it, and in the Book of Esther especially, the whole book, the more we're forced to ask the question, is this book about Esther? Or is this book about Mordecai? Is this book about Mordecai? Or is this book about Israel? Is it about Israel? Or is it about God? Now, you know, the easy Sunday school answer is always God, because it's the Bible. But I ask that question because this book is so fascinating that you could make a case for every one of those. You could make a case that this book is about Mordecai, not Esther. But you could argue pretty strongly that it's about Esther and Mordecai is a supporting role. I don't really know, but now in chapter 2, I can say this, that everybody in chapter 2 loves Esther. So I'm thinking that at least in chapter 2, it's about her. And it's such a fascinating passage to learn about this woman, because I really think that's what chapter 2 is about. In chapter 1, we saw the boastful king overreact to Queen Vashti's refusal to appear before him as his guest, and his guests. You remember the story that the account is given to us in chapter 1 that the king is throwing his big 184 days, I believe it is, of partying, and he's showing off his power, his wealth. And so he's invited the whole military, the Medo-Persian military, or at least the upper echelon of the military. He has invited all the governors and satraps and so forth. He's invited all the royal people and so forth. I mean, just probably thousands and thousands and thousands of people have rotated through this long party. And if that wasn't enough, as soon as he wrapped that party up, he threw another one for 7 days for the extra special people. And we said that's kind of like the Hollywood after parties type stuff. That's sort of what was going on there. And that was held in the garden of the palace, which if in your mind, if you think about the palace, Susha, there were three capitals. This is how big this nation, this empire was. There were 3 capitals of the Medo-Persian Empire. Susha was only one of them, and that was in modern-day Iran. And it's called the Citadel. So in this capital city, you had a military fortified citadel. And in the center of that was the king's palace. So if you were going to invade Susha and try to get the king, you had to first get into the capital city. Then you would have to get into the citadel, and then you would have to break into the palace itself. So he's in layers of protection here. And that's just one of the capitals of the Persian Empire. So he's showing off his power and his might. And, he's got columns and drapes and all kinds of beautiful marble and so forth. And they're drinking out of gold cups and all the wine and drink that they could drink. The king, one fellow said it this way, I think this is this actually helps. He said the Medes and the Persians were all about law. And he said they're so law-oriented that even to tell people they can drink to their heart's desire, they had to make a law. So the king made a law that every person could drink at the party as much as they wanted to. And that kind of is a picture of the mentality of the Medo-Persian Empire. And that's going to be really important as we move through the book of Esther, because there's going to come a time when that Persian law is going to be an obstacle that has to be worked around. And it's going to sound crazy to you and me why that's such a problem. But this will help us realize that. But here, he's got one last thing he wants to show off. One last very, very important thing that he owns, and he wants to show it off to all of his guests. And that happens to be his queen, Vashti. And so he wants to bring her in there like property and show her around. She's supposed to, and he sends the eunuchs after her, and she's supposed to come in with the royal queen's crown and I guess dance or show herself or something. And she says no. And of course he gets angry, and we move into the next section of chapter 2 as the results of her just refusing her husband. I know he's the king and she's the queen, but she just said, no, I'm not coming into your all-male party. Remember, she had a party that she was giving for all of the women. And so David Firth says this. He says, Vashti's refusal triggers a range of events, all of which serve to show the ability of a wounded ego to respond in ways that are completely out of proportion to what has happened. I mean, ultimately here you got the queen who tells the king, I'm not coming into your party. It's all men. I'm not going to do that. So this is a home problem, okay? You know, this is not a state problem. He goes on to say, there was, of course, no law that specifically addressed the problem of a queen not attending the king's party. But the problem for Ahasuerus is that she disobeyed him. Yet, showing the effects of too much wine, he magnifies a simple domestic dispute into a state crisis. I thought that was very, very helpful to understand how to see this. That the arrogance, the pride, the drunkenness of the king has requested something degrading and disrespectful from his own queen, and she has the dignity and honor to refuse. And instead of him apologizing, instead of him trying to correct it in some way, he just gets furious and she's removed as queen. I don't get the picture that she's put to death, but we really aren't told. It just says she's removed. So my interpretation would be that she's just simply removed from that status. She's probably put in the basement of the harem. She's reduced to basically nothing. But she's probably still back in the harem, alive. So that's would be my guess. And my guess also would be that because she's, if I'm right about that, the reason she's alive is because she was probably the daughter of royalty or a nobleman or someone who was powerful. And so to take her life like a common slave wouldn't have done anything but create more problems. But that's some speculation there, but I think it's educated speculation from the passage. But what is amazing is the fact that God has planned to use this drunken pride of the king, of a king like this, to elevate someone who is at the lower levels of Persian society to the very throne room, the queen of the Persian Empire. Any student of the Word who's thinking very closely about this, maybe you've seen this, maybe it's already occurred to you, you're going to immediately think of Joseph. Doesn't this remind you of Joseph? He's a sheep herder in Canaan. He winds up the prime minister of Egypt. Here we've got Jewish people who were captives from the destruction of Jerusalem and the southern kingdom. They're brought into the Babylonian Empire, but then the Babylonians are conquered by the Medes, and the Medes join with the Persians, and now you've got Jews who are living in the Medo-Persian Empire, but they're laying low. They'd rather not be known who they are or their ethnicity, because they came into this situation as slaves and captives. Right now, they're kind of living a normal life. And this is why Mordecai will eventually tell Esther, do not tell them you are a Jew. That's why. So, and yet here Esther, the Jewess, becomes queen. Very much like a Joseph story, isn't it? And she's going to eventually be the trigger to save God's people, just like Joseph. Just like Moses. You see that? That rags to riches type situation. But the real, and God has sovereignly brought this to pass for what reason? To deliver and protect His covenant people. It's amazing to watch this. This is why I love this book so much, because you can see God's not mentioned in this, but you can see the providence of God moving the pieces around on the board, we might say. So the first thing we see is that we have what I call the Miss Medo-Persia pageant. Because that's what it reminds me of. We've got a contest in verses 1 through 4 of chapter 2. After these things, when the anger of the king Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti, not in a good way, and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, and the young men there are counselors, is what they are. Quote, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women or of the harem. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young women or young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. So the contest was recommended to the king, and he liked it, and so he went with it. I don't know about you, but I kind of get the feeling that this has happened before. Maybe not with this king, but this doesn't sound like a one-time event. It sounds like these guys know the ropes on this. This is how this is done. And you can imagine back in those days especially, when these kings were absolutely sovereign. I mean, they it pretty much owned everybody. Now, there were back level political influences and stuff. Many kings lost their lives and were assassinated and things like that. So it's not like they were untouchable, but they wielded a whole lot more power, kind of the power of a dictator in our day would hold. And then we see the contest process explained by the narrator, the writer of the Book of Esther, in verses 12 through 14. So skip down to that one. It says, "Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into the king Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations for the women." So all the women who are in the contest are basically sent to the harem, given everything that they need, and they're just going to sit there for 1 year and go through beauty treatments. Pretty much. I mean, that's really what it is. Oils and ointments, and you guys just your wife's bathroom. It's full of oils and ointments, and basically she's gonna go to Bath and Body Works for 12 months. Oh, but anyway, it says under the regulations of for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying. See, that's what I'm saying. The Miss Medo-Persian pageant. I don't think they had it to show a talent, or wish for world peace. Six months they would with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and ointments for the women. That's a spa. A solid year of oil and spices. I don't know what you do with all that, but anyway, there's something you do with all that, and it lasts 6 months on one and 6 months on the other. When the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. So this is her time. When it's her turn to go in and present herself to the king, she was given the liberty to pick from whatever the harem part of the palace had to go in and make the best presentation of herself that she could. What is that? I don't know. Probably clothes, all the cosmetics, all the oils and all that stuff, Chick-fil-A sauce, whatever. Whatever it was going to take, mud packs, whatever it was going to take to woo the king. She had the opportunity, everything that was there, she could utilize, okay? Which is, sounds like some of these reality shows today, doesn't it? In some ways. But she was given whatever she desired from the harem to the king's palace. And in the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return to the second harem in custody of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuchs. Well, obviously, there were an army of eunuchs. So I will refrain from just talking about that part, but that's an interesting study in itself. The existence of eunuchs and what that means and the impact it has had throughout history. But anyway, the king's got hundreds of these guys, and who was in charge of the concubines. Thus, he's a eunuch. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. So she got one shot to go in and win the heart of the king. And we're not told how many women were involved in this. I'm guessing if they searched the kingdom, there had to be quite a few. And if he remembered her name and called for her to come back, then she could. But other than that, she was not allowed to request his presence, go into his presence, or anything like that. Okay, so there's the Miss Medo-Persia pageantry. Then number 2, we see that Mordecai loved Esther. So the first section there we talked about, that's really more of the setup of the situation. This is how this is going to happen. And the writer, the sacred writer here of Esther, is not so much concerned with the Persian Empire as it is setting up what God or what is going to happen. So now we're getting into the meat of the book here. But I will say this first chapter and a little bit of chapter 2 does an amazing job in such a short amount of time demonstrating that whoever God used to write the Book of Esther knew a great deal about the Persian Empire. And even how the inner palace workings, the throne room and all of that stuff, how all that worked. You realize most Persians, just like in the dynasties of China and you have and all of those places, most citizens would never even see the palace, let alone go in it. So whoever wrote this under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit has tremendous knowledge, inside knowledge of the workings of the palace. And again, I've told you, archaeologists have uncovered this very palace. And the columns that are referred to here were still there. So it's fascinating, isn't it? So Mordecai, though, one of the things that stands out here very quickly is that Mordecai, we see the love that Mordecai had. We'll wrap up with this one tonight, and we'll pick up again next week. But in Esther chapter 2, verse 5 through 11, it says, "Now there was a Jew in Susha, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite." You see his Jewish lineage being named out there. "Who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away with Jeconiah, the king of Judah." That's the last king of Judah. And Mordecai was not carried out. He's not that old. But it's saying probably Kish, his great-great-grandfather, was the one who was carried out as a captive with King Jeconiah by the Babylonians. That's what he's saying there. "Whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah." Hadassah is the Jewish name of Esther. Esther is Persian. Hadassah is her Jewish name, her Hebrew name. That is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, daughter of Mordecai's uncle. "And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her in as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict was proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susha, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetics, her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. What I want you to see here is Mordecai's fatherly guidance, his fatherly love. That he clearly loved Esther like his own daughter. He took her in as a family, an orphan, but an orphan from his own family, his uncle's daughter. And he raised her as his own daughter. And of course, because of the edict of the king, he has to deliver her to the king's harem to go through this pageant, as it were, to select a new queen. But the Bible is very clear here of the pure and fatherly guidance, love that Mordecai has for Esther. That he raised her like a daughter. He checked on her. He walked by the area where she was kept, that he could check on her and see how she was and what was going on. That's going to be very valuable as we go through. This is a very beautiful fatherly love coming from her uncle. And see that as pure as the Bible gives it. It is a very pure love, a godly love. This is the man who has raised her to be Esther, the Esther we're going to learn about. And so we'll stop right there, and we'll pick up in that same area next time. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you. Thank you for the precious